Hello, my name's Charles Parselle. Welcome to The Legal File. I'm very excited today because I'm privileged to have on the show two people who in their field of endeavour are legendary. First, Deborah Rothman. Welcome to the show, Deborah.
Thank you, Charles.
That's Deborah Rothman, who's an attorney and who is an expert in the field of dispute resolution. She can stop tanks in their tracks. She's that good. And matching her, I think I can reasonably say, another eminent professional in this field, Mark Ameli.
Good afternoon, Charles.
Good afternoon, welcome. So let's get right into it. Why don't we start by asking, how did you get into this field?
Actually, it's a very interesting story. I was an attorney, and I still am. I still handle litigation cases, and I was litigating a case. It was an Iranian doctor who had come to me, and his manager had kicked him out of his office. So he wanted to sue the manager for something around $200,000. We tried to settle this case. We tried to mediate the case. It wasn't working, so we went to trial. We went to trial in front of, it was a bench trial in front of Judge Zuliger, and I put my client on the stand, and I said, well, on that day, what happened? And he said, he came and he said something bad to me. I said, well, what did he say? You can tell the judge what he said. He said, no, I can't say that. I said, well, but the judge needs to know. You should tell. He said, can I say it in Farsi and you translate for me? And I said, fine. Your Honor, is it okay if I translate? And I do speak Farsi, I'm fluent. He said, yeah, fine, go ahead. He had used a word which I don't think I can say on TV. It's not a good word to say on TV. And it was about his mother, about the doctor's mother. And when he said that, the doctor started crying on the stand. And this gentleman was about 70, 71 years old. So the judge called us and he said, you guys go in the jury room and settle this case. So we went in the jury room, and it took us a whole day to negotiate and try to settle the case. They were offering money, actually, and they had offered something like $20,000. And I came back to the doctor and I said, they're offering $20,000. You want to settle? He said, no, I don't want to settle. I said, well, what is it that you want? He said, this guy never apologized to me. I said, okay, if I get him to apologize to you, will you settle? He said, yes. So I went back in the room and I told him that this is what he wants. He wants an apology. And I came back out and I told him, okay. And then the guy said, the defendant said, fine, I'll apologize. He's an older gentleman. I came out and told him he is going to apologize. So it's $20,000 and an apology. He said, no, I don't want his money. I said, what do you mean? They're offering 20. He said, no, I don't want the money. All I want is that he apologizes on the record for what he has told me. And in fact, he did. And that was the end of that case. That convinced me that culture plays a very important role in disputes, in creation of the disputes, and in the resolution of the dispute. So from that point on, I started actually, I've been mediating for about 14 years. This happened about 5-6 years ago. And from that point on, I started studying cross-cultural mediation. And this is what I presently do. mediate specifically cases that involve peoples of different cultures, and mainly Middle Eastern cultures is my specialty, since I was born in Iran, and I am fluent in Farsi, but aside from that, all of the Middle Eastern cultures are very, very similar in disputes.
I have an interesting story about that, but I'm not going to tell it right now, because I want to ask Deborah Rothman, you're also an attorney.
Yes.
And you have a law degree from Yale, right?
Undergrad Yale, law, NYU.
NYU, good. Well, so we're all lawyers here, but you are now also, I've already said you could stop tanks in their tracks. So it's going to be a bit...
I think you mean that as a compliment.
I do, and as a metaphor for your great skills. So having set you up in that way, how do you get into this business?
To tell you the truth, I did not enjoy law school. I kind of went to it because I didn't know what to do when I graduated. I sort of hadn't thought my way through what comes next after my BA. So I had an aptitude. I did very well on the LSAT, so I went to law school, didn't really love it, got invited to a fabulous law firm in Los Angeles, so I was footloose and fancy-free. I moved from New York to LA, started with the firm, loved the people, didn't like litigation. I had a wonder, it was the firm itself, Manat Phelps is the name of the firm, did, and I assume still does, a lot of entertainment work. So as a litigator, I was sometimes called on to handle litigation matters on behalf of some of the celebrity clients, the entertainment clients. And in this particular case, it was after one of those 100-year reigns that we have in Los Angeles once every 5 years. Joni Mitchell's hillside had been eroded, and it slid. She was up at the top of a hill, and her hillside and side of her pool slid down into her neighbor's yard. So he was covered in mud and debris, and he was a lawyer and immediately threatened to sue her. So I was dispatched to Joni Mitchell's house to talk with her about, what we should do. And she was, as you can imagine from her music and her appearance, the gentlest, sweetest soul. So vulnerable, so darling. And she said in her soft Canadian way, I don't understand this. I don't understand what happens. We've just had an emergency. I would expect the community to pull together and say, what can we all do about this? You have a problem, I have a problem, we have neighbors who have a problem. What do we all need? How can we help each other? What is this about a lawsuit? And I thought, she's got it. That's the answer.
Nice. Yeah.
So that's kind of what got me out of litigation and heading towards mediation.
It's very interesting. Well, this is very brief. You can guess the culture. I worked on a case all day. The parties wrote loggerheads. One man sat outside. I assumed he wasn't a participant. But as I went to and fro on my travels that day, I would always speak to him and say, how are you doing? How do you feel? Would you like some coffee? Just being polite, how one does. So everyone came to an agreement. It was quite late in the evening. And the principal in one of the rooms says, well, I just have to check with my brother. And it turned out to be the man on the sofa. He said no. Well, he hadn't been involved in any way in the proceedings.
Yes.
So this is a challenge for a mediator, which is what I am. You'd agree, challenging at this moment. So I did what I did. I took him for a walk. Not the way the mafia take people for a walk. We walked round the building, which is built on a square, and we talked for a while. And I think he looked older than me, but he may have thought I look older than him. So after we walk around, I'm not doing anything except walking in time with him and chatting. And at the end, and after we walked around about 5 times, he says to me, well, you tell me what you think I should do. And I said, well, I think you should sign the agreement. So he thought about that for a while, and he said, I really don't want to sign it, but I will, because you are my older brother. Guess the culture.
Well, there is, I was doing, there are issues involved with when they talk about high power distance and low power distance. And that comes into play in different cultures. In the Middle Eastern cultures, people look to authority in a different manner as they do in the Western cultures. When you talk to an American here, to a Western European person, they will consider your statement, but that's one of very many events that they will consider. When you talk to a Middle Easterner, they will look to you as an authority. And when he called you my older brother, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are older than him.
No.
It means that you are wiser than he is, and that's why he is looking to you to let him know what he needs to do.
Interesting. Well, I will say this. First of all, I was very touched and humbled by what he had to say.
Right.
And secondly, I'm convinced that, really unbeknownst to me, but during the day, just chatting briefly as I passed to and fro, had built up a rapport,
yes.
a mutual respect, which permitted that result in the end. Have you had any well, Mark told the apology story, which is really interesting. Have you ever had an experience like that, Deborah?
Definitely. The power of an apology, of a sincere apology, really can't be overestimated. I mean, I know that it's used kind of cynically today. I've been doing this for close to 20 years. So in the infancy of mediation, it had, I think, a lot more power. Now it's anticipated by plaintiff's counsel and coached by the defense, and it doesn't have as much power. But I'll tell you a funny one. I was working on a case that had previously been mediated by a retired judge. It had not settled. In fact, I think the parties were further apart in terms of the animosity had ratcheted up when the case didn't settle. And so I was brought in to try to bring some closure to the case. And I was having a hard time because, they had already entrenched in their positions, in their dollar figures, and in the sanctity of their positions. And so this was long enough ago that an apology was still something novel. And so I talked with the representative from the company that was being sued, and he had never even met the plaintiff, and but had heard terrible things, and of course no company likes to get sued, and anybody would take it personally if they're loyal to their company. And so I said, well, it would be good if you could try to see it from her perspective. And, even if you don't agree with her perspective, at least tell her, that you as a human being, understanding the pain that she was caused, are sorry that she had to go through that. And that, you're glad she's here today and that you'd like to resolve it, and you're glad that she wants to resolve it. And he was still a little dubious, so I said, well, are you married? And he said, yes. I said, okay, imagine that your wife came home to you, and I recounted the facts from the plaintiff's perspective. Would you be able to empathize with her and say, oh, honey, I'm sorry that you went through that, even though it's not your fault? And he said, oh, yeah. I said, okay, so that's really what I need you to do. He said, okay, fine. So we brought the plaintiff and this representative of the defense into a small room, and I explained to her that he wanted to understand better what she went through, and could she talk to him for a few minutes, and she did. And he listened carefully, and he said, but you still, you're not entitled to money for that.
Right. My opinion about apologies is that they need to be, a good apology needs to come early, it needs to be sincere, and it needs to come with no strings attached. As for sincerity, I will mention the words of the great the late great George Burns, who said in show business, sincerity is everything, and if you can fake that, you've got it made. But you can't fake. But a faked apology is no apology at all.
True.
Right.
It's a sociopath's apology. So my experience of apologies is that they are few and far between, because by the time people come to us, it's a little bit late. And is that your experience as well? I mean, are they frequent in your business?
Well, in the Iranian community and in the Middle Eastern community, kissing and making up counts for a lot, and people, in fact, do that. They want to shake hands, and in order to be able to shake hands, somebody has to apologize.
Right.
And so it's a question of who will apologize first, and that is what you have to work on.
And when the first person apologizes, will the second one reciprocate?
9 out of 10 times, if the first person apologizes, the second one will reciprocate, and the case is finished.
Good.
So this is what you want to bring, the first apology, and that is very important. And the reason why it's very difficult to bring the first apology is because of the face-saving issue that is very, very important in the Middle Eastern community. In that culture, losing face is worse than anything that you can have. And therefore, how do you bring an apology without losing face? And that is the important issue. That is what you have to work on to bring it in.
Well, we live in a world, our professional world, in which emotion it tends to be very strictly controlled, I might even say suppressed. And I would say this is, well, what do you think? I say that this is absolutely true of court cases, that court cases are like kabuki plays. They're highly stylized, and emotion is not welcome.
You have not seen a case between two Middle Easterners. In fact, emotion does play a great role, and one of the things that I would like to do is to hear them flesh out their emotions. At some point during the mediation process, they have to flesh out their emotions.
Well, I mean, I think that makes your point, which is lawyers are not comfortable with emotion being expressed. All of our training tells us, that it has no place in the courtroom, and it probably doesn't. So our job as mediators is to help the lawyer feel comfortable while the party expresses emotion in a way that's productive towards a settlement.
So do you have stories about that? Have you seen that in your mediation practice?
Oh yeah, I mean that's kind of, I think, really the art of the mediator, and it takes a certain amount of command of the mediation room to be able to first comfort the parties and let the lawyers do their thing. We try to convince the litigators that mediation advocacy is really different from litigation advocacy, and that they're not representing their clients ably if they are conciliatory around the mediation table. And that usually we talk about that in advance so that they're prepared to be conciliatory. But first the lawyers need to do their thing and talk about the law and, evidence and summary judgment and jury verdicts and that sort of thing. But I think the most powerful mediations are the ones in which people really do express what happened, how it made them feel, and get some acknowledgement from the other side, without it being an admission of guilt, just, I hear you, that's really powerful. I did a lot of mediation in the Smith Barney and Merrill Lynch gender discrimination class actions. And some of these plaintiffs had really, really felt like they'd been through the mill. And there was a lot of preparing of the Smith Barney representatives and their counsel and the Merrill Lynch people to just get them to relax and just hear it and go, oh. I refer to it as sort of a Greek chorus. The Greek chorus isn't making a judgment, it's just sighing in the background.
That's very true. That's very true. I think that's certainly interesting. What I've always found, I generally find anyway, and as you've already said, A, the lawyers are uncomfortable, B, you have to sort of calm them down. It's going to happen. Oh, it's really going to happen. I had a case with two people who were high-end salesmen. They actually sold watches, very, very expensive watches. I said,
you see that you did a trade out.
No, actually I looked at my watch, but this is not an expensive one. It's rather funny, isn't it? I said, who are your best customers? This is a very surprising answer. He said, Russians and Venezuelans. I had to get these two guys in the room alone, so I achieved something which is hard to do, which is to persuade the lawyers to stay out of the room because they were too jumpy.
Yes.
They were too nervous, and they would intervene. So I got these two guys who are very smart guys. One sat at one end of the table, one sat at the other. I sat in the middle. I was the umpire. I said, I didn't say anything. I said, and they went at it. They yelled at each other for such a long time. It was fun to watch. My only fear was that the lawyers would burst in and ruin everything. And then once they'd done, they sort of ran down. Gradually they stopped, then they got up, shook hands, started selling each other merchandise. That was quite fun. So cross-culturally, you say emotion emotion rules.
I think that emotions should be flushed out. But talking about lawyers, sometimes lawyers are their own worst enemies in mediation. And I had a case where it was a Chinese lady, and I went and talked to the defendant. Plaintiff was Chinese, and I came to the room to talk to the plaintiff, and the attorney, there were two gentlemen there. The attorney asked them to go and wait outside. So I started talking to this Chinese lady, first generation, obviously. I wasn't getting any response. And I finally asked the attorney, who were these two people? It was the father and the brother. So, well, why did you kick them out? Bring them in. So they were brought in, and we ended up settling that case very quickly. And she did not talk. It was only the father who was talking, and the son, the brother, was basically agreeing with the father, whatever the father was saying. And so you have to know who the opponent is. Very similar to the gentleman that was sitting outside, the brother, in the case that you indicated. And he was sitting outside all day long when people who really don't have a say-so were inside and negotiating.
You make a good point, Mark. When I first began mediating, I would be so disappointed because we'd get to what felt like the end of the mediation and everybody seemed to have a deal going, and then the plaintiff would say, let me just call my wife and tell her. And it'd be one of those, yes, dear, yes, dear. Yes, dear conversations, and we wouldn't have a settlement. So I'm very careful now to make sure counsel understand that we need to have all the decision makers or the influential people on the decision makers present in the room. Because there's magic that occurs in a mediation, and it cannot be communicated after the fact when you're like, well, I did insist on the X $1 million, but I'm taking 10,000 because it makes sense after the mediation. You have to be there to see that it makes sense. And lawyers want to try to be real legalistic about, well, they're not a party. I can't see any reason for them to be in the room. And you know, we have to explain to them all over again, this is about getting a deal done.
Yeah.
And one that everybody can live with and that doesn't get jettisoned the next day.
Well, we're going to run out of time, so the short time available to us. Would you like to say what you find wonderful about this job, and also whether you think there are wider implications to it in terms of, you know, settling things down in society?
Well, I think that cross-cultural mediation is what we need in the Southern California, especially in the Southern California, because of the various cultures that are involved here. Now, once you understand cross-cultural mediation, maybe you would be able to apply it to mediation between the two countries that we're involved in.
Well, that's what we're off. That's what we're on about. But you've got about 30 seconds, Deborah, to give your pitch.
I think it's all about people to people.
People to people, and a bit more than that. So is eating apple pie.
Well, the point is, if people can learn to have a relationship in which they actually hear each other, they don't just listen and think about how they're going to argue, but they really take it in and let the other person know that they've got it, that they've heard it.
That's wonderful. And
Peace.
Peace in the room.
Peace.
So we're in agreement pretty much on this, and here we are, three mediators sitting around a room, and we've touched on, we don't really have hardly any time, but we've touched on the possibility of wider implications. We start off person to person, one person at a time, two people at a time, and we move on from there. I really want to thank you, Deborah Rothman, Mark Ameli, for coming on the show. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I hope we have the opportunity to do it again sometime soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Charles.
It's been great. Thank you.